Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Premier League check-in podcast with myself, Benjamin Bloom, and the outstanding Matt SB. And they're doing us a favour here, our relegatees, by taking it in turns week on week. Ipswich are a fag paper away from being relegated now, but they are not down yet. They are going to last the longest. It is Leicester City who we need to talk about this week, Matt. They are down. They gave pretty good go against Liverpool, who are kind of, not quite sure how to play the run in, knowing that they're going to win the title. But Leicester, we've had a little chat just before we've gone on. It doesn't feel as disastrous as Southampton, and it feels like there's a lot more by way of mitigating factors. And in fact, Matt, let's start before the season even begins. Leicester coming up with Enzo Maresca in the dugout. Kieran Dewsbury Hall was the best player. And fill in the gaps, Matt. What happens to those two in pre-season to start off the Leicester story on what's gone wrong here?
Well, they both go off to Chelsea, don't they? You just go back a little bit further as well. Obviously, Maresca did a fantastic job bringing Leicester City up through a very competitive championship. The one thing that's always stuck with me from last season, Ben, was there was a little spell where a reasonable portion of that Leicester City fan base weren't with Maresca, and that's despite them going on to win the league. And that might pop up later when we talk about the manager who came in after him. But he did a good job. He got them up. He was attracted by Chelsea, of course, though, and then he takes Dewsbury Hall, who, like you say, was their best player last season. The business in the summer was okay. We've just touched on a couple there. Fatawu, I think, was a good re-signing. We couldn't believe there, Ben, that Ollie Skip was 20 million, and then there's El Canouse as well, 20 million. So they did spend a bit.
He's been decent, El Canouse, though, hasn't he?
He's been decent, yeah. There was Caleb Okoli as well. So they gave it a go, and obviously they bring in Steve Cooper. First thing with Steve Cooper is there was a bit of I'm trying to think of the right word, backlash straight away because of his time at Nottingham Forest. And obviously, they're not direct rivals. That's more Derby County and Nottingham Forest, but there is still a bit of an East Midlands rivalry there. So there's already people not totally on board with Steve Cooper. And then obviously the style of football is going to be completely different as well, Ben, because you're in the Premier League now, and it's not 2015-16 where Leicester City are going to go on and win the Premier League. It's all about, can you stay up? And well, Ben, take us into the start of the season.
Well, let me just ask you a question. It feels a bit of an outlier for a team to get promoted and lose their manager. I'm sure the comments will be screaming with an obvious example I'm missing out of that happening. I guess they could get poached in this way, but I mean, that's kind of the worst possible thing that can happen. We've said so many times on this show this season that everything needs to be online these days, and we'll talk about Leeds and Burnley as we go on, I presume, that we need stability, we need all the recruitment to work, and surely we need the pattern of play to not change in between promotion and Premier League. Surely, mate, that's the worst possible thing. Even if you get a good manager like, say, Steve Cooper, who's stopped up before, you can't change manager and change pattern of play and expect it to work. I say that with the benefit of hindsight, of course.
You're right. I can't think of an example off the top of my head. As you say, someone in the comments will point it out, but it was a strange
Scott Parker
position.
went really early, didn't he? But it wasn't like he got literally cherry picked because it was Bournemouth. But I can't think of another example, Matt.
I can't off the top of my head. And like you say, it was unsettling, but I still thought that they had enough time to get things right. And I personally still think that Steve Cooper was a decent appointment, and we're going to look at what he did do, and maybe he did do a decent job when you see what came after him. But it was always going to be a big change, wholesale changes needed in the summer. His style of football is very different to that of Enzo Maresca's. But like I say, it's the step up in league as well. This isn't just a manager going in any ordinary summer window. This is after a promotion. So, unsettling, I suppose. And like we said, we're not going to do what some of the media do and point the finger at Leicester and say, you failed, you were rubbish, you should have done this, you should have done that. We've had this conversation all season, Ben, that it's so hard to acclimatise. And Leicester City are not just a standard championship club that came up. They've spent, 9 years in the top flight before their relegation straight back up. You're thinking, okay, they've got a chance. They're not a small club. But that said, still, the gulf between the Premier League and Championship now is bigger than ever.
And I think we need to go on to the finances now, because I think that's something that worked maybe in Ipswich's favour. That, first of all, the kind of PTSD and the Leicester and Southampton fans being worn down. And I get it. And if you're a Leicester fan and you type in the comments, mate, we're already, sick of it, before we even got promoted. So I totally get that. But I don't know the exact numbers. There'll be people who can, be far more across this than me. But my understanding is that once P&S really bit in the Premier League, a club of Leicester's size trying to, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, I mean in terms of what they can attract commercially and for gate receipts, trying to go then against, because they were trying to go against the top six, really, weren't they? Clubs with much bigger commercials, much more revenue coming in from every single source. And my understanding is that FFP has completely nuked the chances of the likes of Leicester to be able to pay the wages the top clubs can do. And in the end, that's put them, and we think it's still a bit Armageddonish as they're coming down. But we knew there were problems in the Championship, and I'm not going to give an opinion on it, but I think the objective fact is they didn't play ball with the EFL. They avoided that.
Mm-hmm.
And which takes us to the storyline probably 8-10 games in, Matt, where they didn't get a points deduction. I think even in the cold light of day now, the most kind of tribally based Leicester fan would admit, on the basis of a poorly written bit of kind of governance by the Premier League. So we'll touch again on the money as to how that's going to look next season. But lose your manager, lose your best player, and in a kind of rocky situation financially from the word go, with this potential deduction, which they do get over, hanging over them. That was a weird sequence of events early in the season, wasn't it?
It certainly was. Yeah, I'll pick up the point you said about FFP and how it's almost sort of frozen the landscape as it was, and it's now harder for clubs to latch on to the so-called big six because of how you have to spend your money, and you have to be careful now. And I know if you look at the Premier League table, you can see Nottingham Forest are up there. They've broken it up. Newcastle and Villa have been up there.
But Newcastle and Villa have to sell, Matt, don't
Yeah,
they?
that's the point as well. So Newcastle
Yeah.
United, who've got the rich owners, can't go overboard and spend like some of the top teams can. So that was a glass ceiling put in place in front of Leicester City, who, as you say, had won the league and also been pushing for Europa League football for consecutive seasons. I suppose, Ben, if you look at the summer and the months and weeks leading up to the Leicester City decision, where, like we say, we know now, obviously they didn't get punished, but maybe they thought they might. They can't have been sure that they were going to get away with this, and maybe they were bracing for impact, thinking, do you know what, we might get hit, we might get relegated, and it's difficult to plan and keep a positive mindset, I suppose, around the club when you've got that sort of hanging over you.
From the way they approached it, I think they were quite confident that
Well, they did a
they'd
good
blown
job
a
with it, is
massive.
what I will
They
say.
did a
Yeah.
they did a blinding job. I mean, at the end, it's not made any difference, and we'll talk about what's potentially, and we know the whole thing is when the handover takes place between you becoming a member of the EFL from the Premier League, and we expect an automated email from the EFL probably 1 second after that happens to be landing in Leicester's inbox. It's weird, isn't it? Because from the bigger picture, you almost say Leicester win the title, FFP comes in. That will never, ever, ever happen again unless we get sweeping changes in what's happening here. So you and I were pretty much in agreement. We're both kind of Steve Cooper fans from the Nottingham Forest team that was in the Championship from covering there, which was pretty spectacular, wasn't it? But the next part of the storyline, and I don't think you can argue objectively that this has been a really bad decision. And I mean, you can say, well, you don't know what Ruud van Nistelrooy, if he stays, is going to do. And if he gets them promoted and then stabilises them in the Premier League, you can then argue it was the right decision. But sitting here right now, the decision to sack Stevie Cooper and bring in Ruud van Nistelrooy is not looking too clever, Matt.
It certainly isn't, Ben. I've got the numbers in front of me, and Do you know what? I was watching one of our check-in podcasts from earlier this season the other day, and I think it was, I don't know, 10, 12 games in, and we were quite optimistic about Leicester City, Ben. We were, I think they had back-to-back wins at one point, and although, as we say, the football might not have been the prettiest, and Leicester City fans might have wanted a better style of play and more convincing wins, look at the situation they find themselves in now. Under Steve Cooper, Ben, they picked up 10 points in 12, which is just under a point per game, but if you play that out over 38 games, you're probably getting 32, 33 points. Maybe not enough to stay up, but gives you a chance. They wouldn't have been relegated as they are now at this stage. 15 goals as well inside those 12 games. So they've scored more under Cooper, even though Cooper had about half the amount of games that Ruud van Nistelrooy's had. Ruud van Nistelrooy with 12 goals in 21, 8 points in 21. That home form as well, Ben, where they've not been
Oh
scoring.
no.
They've been breaking records. And you look at the last 10, 12, 14 game form tables, they're worse than Southampton. I know Southampton have been rooted to the bottom, but Leicester City have really flatlined. It's been horrendous to watch. Best defence in the Championship last season. I know it's a step up, but second worst defence in the Premier League this season. It's been a disaster changing managers. I get it as well, by the way. I did say this a couple of videos ago that I can understand that the Leicester City fans that did want change didn't want this. I know that's obvious,
Yeah,
but
it's fine, yeah.
it is a gamble, and it can go this way, and that's the way it's gone. Like I say, Steve Cooper might have gone down with him anyway, but I thought they'd have had a better chance, and it's turned out to be a really bad decision.
There's been this sense, hasn't there, that Wolves in the first third of the season, I mean, they've been outstanding since they've changed manager, but Wolves kind of gave the three promoted teams a bit of a chance for a while. And it almost feels like West Ham are absolutely stinking the place out. Spurs are stinking the place out. Man United are stinking the place out. In terms of how far below the level they should be, you can almost argue those teams are further below expectations than Southampton, Ipswich, and Leicester are. But yet we sit here still with this massive, massive gap. And obviously, look, you can say what you like about Wolves, but to your point, and I really feel sorry for the season ticket holders as well. When you're not even scoring any goals, do you know what I mean? It's just not fun to go. And I know that Leicester fans will support their team if they're in the blooming National League and still show up. But yeah, it's not been fun. And we're going to say this. We said it about Southampton. We're going to say it about Ipswich as well, probably next week after Newcastle away. But there's just this sense that once that floor or glass ceiling, as you said, just raised up with the Wolves change of manager, you just saw how miles and miles off. But it's a team that scored 97 points last year in the Championship, Matt.
I know. Well, like I say, even under Steve Cooper, the projection was 33 points. And you look at what the teams like West Ham and Wolves are doing now, they're above a point per game, and it wouldn't have been enough anyway. But
They'll get 40, Matt, won't they now, I
yeah,
think?
exactly.
Yeah.
So I suppose what you want is not that you want relegation, but you want to, if you're going to go down swinging. You don't want to go down this early. And I just find it demoralising, Ben. The results and the fact you've got so many games still to play, and what's there to play for? It's just really, really depressing. So yeah, I agree with your sentiment on feeling sorry for the Leicester fans. In good news, they're back in the Championship, and we expect them to do well next season. But obviously, it's not been pretty this season, and it makes you think: what happens if they come down and go back up again? How do we know it's not going to be a repeat and they come back down again? So that's the cycle we've spoken about with all of these teams that are looping around at the moment. But not great. I mean, obviously, other than the managerial change, other things to touch on. Ricardo Pereira picked up an injury. That's a big blow, of course, losing him for a lot of the season. Jamie Vardy's getting older. I know he's still a good goal scorer, and I expect if he's in the Championship next season, he'll get himself a load more goals. But I think he got 20 last season. He's only managed 7. So, yeah, like I say, when you're conceding as many as they are and they're not scoring, only one thing's going to happen, and you're going to lose games.
Have you got any kind of a concern radar going off for Leicester next season? Because we've already kind of joked they're probably going to get a points deduction deferred from when they were back before, because it was you're not in this jurisdiction, you're not in this jurisdiction. Well, you're back now and you're definitely in the jurisdiction. I think the wording's been tightened up. I don't know whether that's 2 points, 4 points, 6 points. whatever it's going to be is not helpful. We think the contract situation with a lot of the players is not amazing, and we think the FFP numbers are they seem to be close every year
Mm.
for Leicester. Um, it doesn't feel like that for when we're going to talk about Ipswich next week. I know Southampton are going to have a manager change, aren't they? And that's going to have to be dealt with. And I know, Matt, you and I'll do it. We'll sit there. Here's a prediction about predictions. We'll do our 1 to 24s, and we'll probably have all three of the parachute teams in at least the top five, possibly the top four, right? Depending on where we put in, I don't know, a Birmingham or something like that. I don't know how it's all going to look when the transfer window opens, but I don't know. It does feel like it's not going to be completely plain sailing. Leicester fans will argue last time they sold James Maddison, Harvey Barnes for a truckload of money as well. They're not coming down with players of that caliber. Have you got any kind of concern, or do you just think they're going to be too powerful as a year one parachute team?
Yeah, it's certainly not the same as when they came down in 22, 23, because they went down on the final day. They were a decent Premier League team, maybe unlucky because that was the last time we had a good relegation battle where teams actually went down with 30 plus points, Ben. Hey, I wonder when we'll see that again.
Stop
But
it.
yeah, they sold players and they reaped the benefits, and they did really well last season. And Maresca was a good appointment. You would imagine they'll get the right appointment. I mean, it'd be interesting. I am curious to see if they stick with Rude, Ben, because go on. Sorry,
I was just going, well, how else is he going to get a Premier League job?
I
It
was going to
feels like the
say
only way for him to work in the Premier League, he's got to take Leicester back up, hasn't he?
exactly that. I was going to say. So I think he needs to prove himself now. I'm not entirely blaming Leicester's relegation on him, by the way, but I'm just saying if he's a good enough manager, and it would show a bit about his character if he's willing to stick at it and try and get them back up. In regards to next season, though, Ben, I am curious to see what the points deduction will be. I agree with you. I think there is one coming. They're not going to get away with it this time, are they, Ben? But how many will it be? Because the thing is, I expect, although the Championship's a strong league, and we expect there'll be strong teams coming up from League One, and there will be some good teams that don't get promoted this season. You look at the Championship table this season, Ben. Leeds, Burnley, Sheffield United. There's such a big gap between them, and then I suppose there's Sunderland, but then there's another big gap down to fifth. That even if Leicester get walloped with a 10-point deduction, you can still see them being in
Oh,
in
there's
the top
nearly
three.
20 points between Burnley and
Yeah,
Sunderland, isn't there? It's second and fourth at the moment.
I think there'd have to be a mega deduction to make things more interesting, because I still think with any kind of deduction 10 or less, they're going to be right up there for me next season. I know we're talking a long way away. The season for the Championship next year doesn't start till August, but they're my early predictions, if that's anything to go by, because the relegated teams always come back strong.
You're totally right. The chasms work both ways, don't they? It's horrible when you're on the bottom end of it and you're 15 points off everybody, but you make a really good point. And I always reference your Coventry playoff final where you did have a couple of the teams, Norwich and Watford, not make the most of their year one parachute payment advantage. And all of a sudden, the door opens up. And even right now, potentially, we could have a 69-point playoff team. So there is a chasm below that, which if you're a Leicester fan or a Southampton fan or a Ipswich fan, we'll talk about presumably next week, you expected to be in the little box above all of those teams, which is the top four, isn't it? So yeah, and so the cycle continues. It does feel though, just to round this out, Matt, that needs to be some kind of hard reset at Leicester, which it's almost like they could do with actually not getting promoted to reset the whole squad. I know what's just happened at Leeds. It was disastrous that they didn't get promoted last season. But if you can ride it out and you actually get some stability, you get rid of all those Premier League contracts over time. I don't know. I feel like what you said 5 minutes ago, they'll probably go back up again, might not actually be that helpful. They could almost do with doing a couple of seasons in the Championship, resetting, hopefully not losing too much star power, and just restabilizing the finances. Although I know I'll get comments saying, yeah, what sort of squad are they going to go up with, Ben? And is it going to be another 25 points?
It's a very good topic of conversation, that about teams having to take a step or two backwards before really stepping forwards. We can maybe talk about Birmingham City being an example of that. Not that they wanted to get relegated, but maybe they'll come back a lot stronger. I'm trying to work this out. I suppose slightly different to Leeds, because Leicester will have just the 2 years of parachute payments now after just being back up for one. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about going back up in the second season. Yeah, I suppose we'll see. I still can't really see past them, Ben. I don't want to sound boring, but we are repeating the same stuff because it is true that there's massive chasms. And even Leicester with a 10-point deduction, I'm very much fancy to be in the top three.
There you go. Right, get in the comments. This has been beautifully timed by our relegatees. You can check back on the Premier League check-in podcast. I think it was a couple of weeks ago we had to do Southampton. So we had a similar conversation. I think what is helpful, Matt, there do seem to be different nuances with each team. And I think when we talk about Ipswich, and I'll have to try and make sure you're 70% of the conversation and I'm not dominating it with my football supporter hat on. I think we might be a bit more positive given where Ipswich have come from. And, you know, you can almost argue they're still on a trend up, whereas Leicester and Southampton, that needs to be righted, else it's going to be a longer term trend down. But please get in the comments. Good faith arguments, please. We're really interested in this big picture discussion about the teams going down. It's very easy to call them pathetic and terrible and all of those things. But if you think that, tell me what they should have done and tell me the way around it in the horrible climate at the moment for promoted teams. And yeah, to Matt's questions, let us know in the comments. Ruud van Nistelrooy next season, would you think that would be good? Would you think that would work? Would that be a good move for him? Would that be a good move to Leicester to stay there and points deduction come in? Or to Matt SB's point, is it even likely to make any difference whatsoever? There you go. That is the latest Premier League check-in podcast. Spoiler alert, we're probably going to be talking about Ipswich getting relegated next week. So it might be a good companion, Matt, the three pieces that we do together on each of the different teams. And we're about to head over to the Matt SB channel. And if you think the Premier League is dull, the League One automatic promotion race is not. And we are off to talk about that. So join us over on the Matt SB channel.